You raise a child, give him everything, and still, he finds a way to turn your love into leverage. I used to believe that if you gave with a full heart, you'd never be left empty. That belief, it died the night I passed the mashed potatoes across the table, and my son slid a manila envelope in their place. It was a Thursday, cold for October. I remember because I'd baked a lemon pie John used to love, the one with the buttery crust so delicate it cracked when you looked at it wrong. Marcus always claimed it was his favorite growing up, though in hindsight, I wonder if he just said that to keep me making it. He'd called a week earlier, rare these days, and said he and Rachel wanted to stop by, spend some time, just the three of us. It had been months since they visited. I should have known better. Rachel came in first, belly round beneath her cardigan, cheeks flushed from the cold. She smiled like a woman performing kindness rather than feeling it. Marcus followed, carrying a bottle of wine he knew I wouldn't drink and a bouquet of supermarket roses. "Smells like childhood in here," he said, hugging me with one arm, already glancing around the living room like a man touring a property. Dinner was stilted. Rachel picked at her food. Marcus talked a little too much, about the baby, about inflation, about how the city was changing. He admired the house, said how lucky I was to still be here while everyone else is being priced out. He kept using phrases like legacy home and multi-generational wealth. I should have seen it forming, like storm clouds building on the edge of a supposedly clear sky. Then came the envelope. He slid it across with practiced ease, like he'd done it before to someone else maybe. Or maybe he'd rehearsed it in the mirror. "Mom," he said gently, with that same tone he used to use when asking for more allowance, "we've been talking and we think it makes a lot of sense to bring this house into the family trust. It's just paperwork, really. You'd still be living here, obviously. Nothing changes. It just helps us secure a lower mortgage rate on the property and do some renovations with better terms. For the baby, you know." Rachel chimed in, rubbing her belly like punctuation. "It would mean so much to all of us, to keep this house in the family, make it part of our child's future." The words tangled in my ears. Nothing changes. For the baby, legacy, it was coaxing. Through the language of love. I looked at the papers, dense, legal, 4 pages single-spaced, my name printed 3 times in bold, his once in clean, sharp font. I asked, "Why not have Denise, my lawyer, look this over first?" He smiled, took my hand, my fingers still dusted with flour from the pie. "It's just boilerplate, Mom. I looked it over. It's all standard. Nothing sketchy, I promise. I'd never do anything to hurt you. You're all I've got left." That all I've got left, it sliced through me sharper than any clause in the fine print. And just like that, I overrode my instinct. I didn't want to seem paranoid, controlling, alone. I'd been those things too long already since John passed. I wanted to believe I was still part of something, his family, his future. So I signed. Each stroke felt heavier than the last, like I could feel something slipping with every loop of ink. I told myself, it's just formality. I told myself, it's still your house. I told myself, this is what trust looks like. When I finished, Marcus kissed my cheek like he was 13 again, then scooped the envelope back quickly and tucked it into his coat. Rachel praised the pie again. We talked about baby names as they put on their coats. They left me with 2 Tupperware containers and a sense of unease I couldn't name. I remember walking them out to the porch. The leaves had begun to fall. A breeze lifted the dead ones on the sidewalk, swirling them like confetti from a wedding I hadn't been invited to. Marcus turned and said, "You'll see, Mom. This is gonna be good for all of us." I nodded. But something inside me, a place I hadn't felt since John's funeral, felt just a little bit hollow. And the next morning, when a black SUV idled in my driveway, and a woman in heels stepped out with a clipboard and a realtor's smile, that hollowness cracked wide open. The paper was still on the table when they left. I just sat there, fingers resting along its edge, not pressing down. Just touching. Not the one Marcus brought, no. That was gone, whisked away like a magician hiding the trick. I mean the deed. The original, curled slightly from age, embossed with our names, mine on the left, and John's on the right. John Carter. Even his name looked solid, square, grounded, just like he was. I traced it with my thumb the way some women might a locket or a wedding band. That paper wasn't just ink and ownership. It was our story pressed into fibers. 26 years of it. We bought the place in '91, prefab shell, peeling linoleu. Shingles flapping every time the wind ran through the hills. But my God, did we make it ours. I remember nights we couldn't afford heat, so he'd pile blankets on the bed and pull me under like it was a fortress. We painted every wall ourselves, sometimes arguing over the shades. He was awful with color, kept choosing greens that made the kitchen look like a sick room. I settled it by baking a pie in the winning Hughes dish. He never argued after that. The back window still had a chip from where he slipped with the ladder fixing the gutter. Said it gave the house character. "It's not perfect," he told me, sipping his coffee in the mornings, "but it's ours and it stands because we stand together." That stuck with me, always did. After he died, I never changed a thing. Not the chipped window, not the paint, not the porch swing he insisted on hanging too high because we're not old yet, Evie. I left his books on the shelf, his coat on the hook by the door. Some things you don't replace. And now, suddenly, something gnawed at me. Marcus's face flashed in my mind, that gentle smile, but too polished, too rehearsed. I walked to the mantel. Our wedding photo sat there, framed in silver. I heard my own voice out loud, low and unsteady. "Did I just hand this place away, John?" The house was quiet, not peaceful like after a long day. No, this was the stillness of a breath held too long, of something waiting, watching. I opened a drawer in the hallway, the one with all our old bills, appliance manuals, and somewhere at the back, a fading accordion file of property papers. The deed was there, all right. The real one. The one with John's signature, heavy ink, wide stroke, never the careful penmanship of a slick man trying to minimize risk. I laid it out on the kitchen table, next to the copy Marcus brought, side by side. One bled memories, the other bled pretense. And yet I signed it. Why? Because I wanted to believe we were still a family. Because I let myself think that maybe, just maybe, I was being old-fashioned, clinging to things that were better passed on. I thought Marcus knew what this house meant. But then again, he hadn't stepped foot inside in almost a year before last night. Not since John's anniversary. Even then, he came late, left early, didn't light a candle. My temples throbbed. I turned off the light and climbed the stairs slowly, trailing fingers along the rail John had carved, 17 knots in the wood. I used to count them going up. One for each year we waited for a child. Marcus was our miracle, born after 3 miscarriages and a doctor's final warning. I remember crying in that hallway when I finally brought him home, thinking, the house is full now. I never thought he'd be the one, emptying it. I didn't sleep that night, tossed and turned beneath the quilts John's sister made for us. I kept seeing Marcus's face, then John's, then both overlapping like a photo double exposed. One hand steady, one just a little too smooth. By dawn, I was up, made coffee, black, the way John liked it. And that's when I heard it, an engine low and idling in the drive. I peeked through the curtain. Black SUV, newer model, woman at the wheel. She stepped out, high heels clicking on the walkway like a metronome on hardwood, clipboard in hand. Brown leather folder tucked under her arm. She looked at the house, then at her phone, then back at the house, not like a visitor, like a buyer. At first, I thought she was just lost. The woman in heels, I mean. She paced by the porch steps with a phone pressed to her ear, not ringing the bell, just surveying. Like a bird scouting for nesting space, except there was no warmth in her eyes, only calculation. She never knocked. After a few minutes, she got back in her SUV and drove off. I chalked it up to GPS confusion. This neighborhood has plenty of dead-end drives, and people wander up here all the time, especially since Google started mixing up addresses. But then, an hour later, a young couple in matching Patagonia jackets parked out front. The man held a tablet. The woman had a stroller empty. They didn't knock either, just stood at the end of the driveway, pointing, glancing toward the porch, whispering. Something in my gut tightened. I stepped outside. "Can I help you?" I asked, voice firm even though my knees didn't feel it. The man smiled awkwardly. "Oh, sorry, we didn't mean to intrude. We're just here for the 10 o'clock showing." Showing. He looked at his tablet, then back at me. "This is 812 Lindell, right? The 2-bed, 1-bath with original charm and prime renovation potential." Original charm. I nodded once. "This is 812 Lindell, but it's not for sale." He frowned, scrolling. Says here listed 3 days ago. Agent's name is Collier. Anyway, sorry for the confusion." They backed off quickly, like I'd bitten them. And then came the third car. Then a fourth. By 4 o'clock, 7 separate GR. Oops had wandered by. Some stood on the sidewalk pointing up at the attic windows. One woman took photos of my rose bushes. A man walked around to the side gate and tried opening it, like this was a damn museum tour. I stopped talking to them after the 5th. I just stood in the window, watching them come and go. Interlopers, vultures, open mouths circling a home that hadn't died yet. By sunset, I was sitting at the kitchen table staring at my phone. Marcus hadn't answered any of my 3 calls. I didn't leave voicemails. Not yet. Instead, I texted. "Marcus, call me. People are showing up here saying the house is listed. You need to explain this." No response. At 7:12 p.m., Rachel finally replied. "Hi, Ev, please don't panic. There's a lot going on right now. Marcus will call soon. House stuff is temporary, we'll explain." Temporary, like the signature, like the trust, like my place in their lives. I stared at the screen a long time. The heart emoji sat there like an insult, soft and stupid. I picked up the deed again, the one I signed. There it was, a series of lines buried in legal speak, subtle and sharp like barbed wire in a field of grass. Full and voluntary transfer of all ownership rights, including but not limited to resale, refinancing, rental income, or collateral usage. I didn't understand every term, but I understood enough. I'd signed it away, all of it. And what stung wasn't just the paper. It was the knowledge that Marcus must have had this planned. Before dinner, before the pie, probably before he called at all. I mean, who drafts documents like that on a whim? That's when I heard the mail slot clatter. It startled me, not the sound, but how fast I moved. I opened the door, nothing but the quiet of the evening. A squirrel darted across the lawn. No footsteps. I bent down and picked up the letter. It was addressed to Marcus Carter. At my address. From a place called Pine Circles Realty and Holdings. Return address, Suite 203, downtown Pittsburgh. The envelope felt thick, not casual mail. I opened it. Inside were 3 sheets. One was a preliminary property appraisal report. The second, a broker's checklist for staging prep, including removal of all furniture, wall decor, and any personal items belonging to the previous occupant. Previous occupant. That term hit harder than a slap. The third sheet, a copy of a real estate listing. My house, under the title, Charming Starter Opportunity in Historic District, Priced to Move. Seller motivated. There were 5 pictures, 3 of the outside taken last week, judging by the leaves on the ground, 2 from inside. My kitchen, my bedroom, complete with the blue quilt John's aunt had stitched by hand, the one I hadn't shown anyone in 10 years. The angle showed it all, my books, my lamp, even the little dish I kept earrings in. I didn't remember anyone taking pictures. They must have come while I was out. Maybe when I took my walk down to the creek last Thursday, they'd let strangers in, into my home. My breath caught not from fear, but from something worse. Violation. You can lock the door, but when your own blood hands someone else the key, what good is a lock? I stood there, letter in hand, body still, mind racing. The house creaked. Just a gentle shift, maybe the wind. Maybe old wood being old. Or maybe, just maybe, John reminding me it was time to stop pretending. My hands were still shaking when I folded the papers back into the envelope. Not from age, not from cold. From the betrayal settling into my bones like old rainwater through a cracked window, slow but certain. I sat in the floral armchair by the front window, the same one John used to sit in while reading his newspaper. I don't know how long I stayed there, the letter in my lap, the real estate pictures staring up at me like ghosts wearing my life. I couldn't cry, not yet. The shock hadn't turned into grief. It was still churning, still calculating. I picked up the cordless phone and scrolled until I found Denise. Denise Rutherford was my closest friend since back when we worked the pie booth at church fairs. She'd gone on to become a real estate attorney for a firm downtown. She was smart, steady, the kind of woman who could look a problem in the eye and not flinch. She answered on the third ring. "Evie," her voice was warm, cautious. "I need to ask you something," I said, my voice like gravel. "Can you look over a document for me? Tonight if possible." There was a pause, then, did Marcus do something? I didn't answer. That told her enough. An hour later, she was in my kitchen, reading every word of the transfer paper I'd signed. She didn't try to console me. She didn't flinch. She read. She flipped the last page shut and placed it on the table like something that smelled foul. "It's airtight." I stared at her. She took a breath. "Legally speaking, you signed it. It's a complete transfer of ownership, not shared stake, not assing, not even a trust. It gives him full rights. Sell, rent, refinance, renovate. He can evict you, Evie." I blinked. It took effort. "Did he tell you what this was?" "He said it was temporary, just to help qualify for a loan, something to help refinance. I didn't read it close enough." I looked down. "That's on me." "No," she said sharply. "It's on him." She reached out, tapped a manicured nail against a line of text. "This right here, this should have been its own form, separate meeting, a lawyer present. He knew damn well what he was doing." I swallowed. My throat was dry. "So that's it then." Denise leaned back, eyes scanning the ceiling like she was looking for a loophole stitched into the paint. "We could try and do influence, but you'd have to prove coercion. Hard to do when he was smiling and asking nicely. Judges don't like gray areas," she said softly, "especially when the ink's dry." I nodded slowly. She sighed and stood. "I'll see if there's anything. Maybe we can delay closing, but it'll be uphill." The door clicked shut behind her 15 minutes later. I sat in the quiet again. The kind of quiet that sobs might fill, but I didn't have any, not yet. And then, like a flicker behind the curtain of memory, I heard John's voice. "Put it in the clause, Evie, just in case." It wasn't a shout. It wasn't dramatic, just steady, like the man himself. I stood. My knees creaked, but my spine, God bless my spine, it held firm. I walked down the hallway, past the dusty mirror, past the cabinet full of unfiled paperwork and Christmas cards I never sent, into the kitchen, through the back door, and down the narrow basement stairs that still groaned in the third step from the bottom. The air down there smelled like old paint and apology. I pulled the chain light. It blinked once, then glowed. There, beneath the shelves of pickled beets and leftover caulk tubes, was the old army green lockbox. I hadn't touched it since John passed. There'd been no reason to. The key was still on the nail behind the breaker panel. I unlocked it with hands that had once braided Marcus's hair when he was 6. Small hands, chubby cheeks, big dreams, That boy would have never done this. I opened the box. Inside, dust, a few army medals, a dried boutonniere from our wedding anniversary, an envelope labeled "Mortgage, do not lose." Another marked deed addendum, final version, JGC. My breath caught. I reached in carefully, like touching something sacred, and pulled out the second envelope. It crinkled in the way paper does when it's held too long. The edges curled slightly. The ink faded, but still legible. I unfolded it. At the top, John's handwriting. Survivorship Contingency Addendum, Carter Residence, filed June 2005. My eyes scanned the lines. Half of it legalese, but the meat of it, there it was. In the event of any transfer, sale, or reassignment of the Carter residence within 20 years of John G. Carter's death, the surviving spouse must provide written reauthorization, or else the transaction is considered void under Article VII Clause B of Joint Property Agreements established in 1991. I read it again, and again. Then I laughed, just once. A breathy, stunned exhale that sounded like a woman cracking open. He'd protected me, all those years ago, already thinking ahead. Not because he didn't trust Marcus, but because he knew how grief could cloud reason, how love could make you sign anything. I wiped my eyes, not with emotion, but with determination. I folded the paper back carefully. And as I climbed those stairs again, each step felt a little more solid. The house groaned above me, but this time it sounded like a sigh of relief. The clause had a smell, not just paper and age, something else, the smell of forethought, of someone who'd seen past illusions, past sentiment. John had known, not specifics, but the world and people, and how time could twist things you once thought unbreakable. I sat at the dining table, the envelope before me, lit by the low amber of the side lamp. The same table we'd hosted birthdays and Thanksgiving, where Marcus once spilled cranberry sauce, and I hadn't even scolded him because he'd drawn a face in it with his spoon and made us laugh. I stared at his empty seat. Then I unfolded the clause again. Every word was there. Filed, signed, stamped. John had made certain this house, our house, couldn't be pushed out from under me like a rug. It wasn't enough just to know. I had to be sure, so I called Denise right then. No appointment, no preamble. "Den," I rasped. "I found something." 20 minutes later, her SUV rolled up the driveway. When she stepped into the kitchen and I passed her the paper, she didn't even sit down. Just stood there, reading slowly, lips moving, eyes darting down the text like a scanner recalibrating. Then she looked up. "Holy hell, Evelyn." I said nothing. "This is real," she murmured. "He had it notarized, filed with the primary deed. It was. S just never activated. We've got this." She sat hard, like her knees gave out from underneath boldness. "I need to double-check the county's record office, but if this wasn't formally revoked and is still indexed under the deed chain, it's enforceable." She looked at me with something I hadn't seen in her eyes in a long time. Pride. I exhaled slowly. This time I let myself feel something. Not rage, not heartbreak, clarity. "So what now?" I asked. She lifted the clause, already texting a picture to her assistant. "Now we file an injunction to halt any sale or transfer. Since the clause predicates your reauthorization, which you never gave, that means Marcus's sale is voidable. He may not even own clear title." I sat back, silent. Denise glanced sideways at me, cautious. "Do you want to call him?" I shook my head. "No." She blinked. "You sure?" "I want the paperwork to reach him before my voice does." I watched her chew on that. Then she nodded, the corners of her mouth twitching. "All right, let's do this your way." She stood and gathered the papers into a folder from her bag. "He's going to throw a fit." I shrugged quietly. "Let him." Denise lingered. "You know, most people would have just blamed themselves, given up." I looked up at her. You don't build a life with a man like John Carter and come out soft." She smiled and left, and I sat there alone again, but different, no longer unsure, no longer hollow. I was something else now, not angry, not even betrayed. I was prepared. I looked around the room. It was still my home for now, but I'd nearly lost it. Not to time, not to nature, but to my own hope, my own love. Maybe that was the sharpest betrayal of all, when the people you helped build learn to unmake you. But not this time. Not if I had anything to say about it. And with this clause, I finally did. I stood slowly and walked into the hallway. Past the picture frames on the wall, birthdays, graduations, Marcus's first bike ride, all chronicled in smiles that now felt like borrowed time. I stopped by John's photo again. The one in his navy dress blues. I touched the glass. "Good eye, love," I whispered. My voice trembled, but not from sorrow, determination. I walked to the phone and dialed Denise again. She picked up after the first ring. "We're not done yet," I said, and meant it. Denise called me the next morning. She didn't say hello, didn't bother easing into it. "Evelyn, you've got him." 3 words. I stood at the sink, drying the same coffee mug I hadn't even sipped from yet. My hands stopped moving. "He sold the house illegally." "Not entirely," she said, "but close. The clause wasn't pulled from county records. It's still indexed, filed under your joint deed. No judge will let that slide. Legally, the sale process has to be frozen. His buyer's lawyer will want to back out the second they see this." I set the mug down. "So what now?" "We're filing an emergency injunction this afternoon. I already emailed the realtor's office and the title company. I'll have a copy in your inbox within the hour." I exhaled steady. "What about Marcus?" I asked. "Hasn't responded to the inquiry yet, but he will." He did. 3 hours later, my phone rang. His name lit up the screen like a flare. Marcus. I let it ring once, twice, then picked up. I didn't speak, just listened. He was already mid-sentence, fast and defensive. "Mom, I don't know who you called or what Denise is doing, but the deal is basically done and you're blowing this way out of proportion. You said it was okay to sign." Still, I said nothing. The silence did something to him. He stammered, filling it. "That clause thing, whatever that is, doesn't matter. It's old. Dad's been gone a decade. You said you trusted me. Rachel and I, we needed the liquidity. We're trying to plan for the baby. We needed." He stopped. I could hear him breathing. When I finally spoke, I kept my voice even. Cold steel wrapped in cloth. "You'll be contacted by Denise this afternoon. I suggest you read everything. Carefully." "Mom." I hung up. No yelling, no crying. I'd done both already, in private, where it belonged. Now it was chess. That night, Denise texted me a confirmation. The injunction had been granted. The sale was halted. No escrow transfer. No key handoff. The realtor had removed the listing within the hour. Pine Circle's Realty was reviewing liability exposure. Translation: they were backing away fast. I walked the house alone again, same as every night. But this time, each floorboard creak sounded less like grief and more like gears turning. Upstairs, I passed Marcus's old room. Still painted in that faded blue he'd picked at 12. Still had the photo of him and John holding that model rocket, the one that exploded on the first launch. He'd cried back then, and John put a hand on his shoulder and said, "A mistake isn't failure. It's just fuel if you take it right." I wondered if Marcus remembered that now. My phone buzzed again the next day. Rachel, I didn't answer. I read the voicemail once. No mention of apologies, just, "What are you trying to prove?" I deleted it. Denise came over that afternoon with a manila folder thicker than a Sunday paper. "Buyer's backing out," she said. "Their attorney wants to avoid any litigation. Says Marcus didn't disclose the clause. Technically, it's fraud by omission." I raised an eyebrow. "Will he be charged?" She hesitated. That depends on how far you want to take this. I looked at her, really looked. There was a time I would have said no, said, he's still my boy. But that boy was a man who walked into my home with a smile and a lie, who packaged betrayal in the shape of family. I said, let's keep going, every inch, every route. She nodded. 2 days later, we got a court date. 2 weeks out. It wasn't the end, not yet, but it was enough. Enough to sleep again. Enough to stand in the hallway, look at the living room, and not feel like a stranger in my own story. That night, I took John's photo down from the shelf, not to put it away, to clean the dust from the frame, to polish the glass, to let him see clearly that I was keeping the promise. Our spine wasn't bending. Not now, not ever. Marcus wouldn't look at me, not once. He sat at the opposing table in that cold courtroom, suit crisp, jaw clenched, fiddling with a pen like it might save him. Rachel sat beside him, oversized sunglasses swallowing half her face, even though we were indoors. They looked like strangers, or worse, like people doing a very bad job pretending not to be. Denise leaned closer and whispered, "That's their third lawyer. Must have scrambled when the first two saw the clause." I didn't reply. I was watching Marcus's foot bounce under the table. Left, right, left, right. The same twitchy habit he had as a child when he knew he'd done something wrong. When he was 5 and broke the neighbor's window with a baseball, he sat in the hallway doing that same dance while I spoke to Mrs. Grant. Back then, he'd cried before I even finished my sentence. Today, there were no tears. The judge entered and we all rose. Gavel down. Case called. Official language flowed like cold water. Carter v. Carter motion to enforce survivorship clause, challenge property transfer, stall escrow release. Our judge's nameplate read Hun. Miriam Downey. No nonsense. Mid-60s. Eyes sharp as piano wire. Denise opened strong. She stood with the authority of someone who knew how to pace truth. Slow, deliberate, and impossible to ignore. Your Honor, my client, Mrs. Evelyn Carter, was led to believe she was signing a temporary refinancing assistance document. What she signed, in actuality, was a full property transfer. My client is 70 years old, recently widowed, and was misled by her only son, who then attempted to sell the property within days. She placed the clause on the lectern, smoothing it like a sacred parchment. And yet, we have here a legally filed, notarized survivorship clause from 2005, signed by her late husband, John Carter. It explicitly states that any sale or reassignment within 20 years of his death requires spousal reauthorization. She let that hang there and stepped back. The opposing lawyer rose, a man with slicked hair and 2 white teeth. He adjusted his tie like it might help. Your Honor, while the clause exists, we contend that Mrs. Carter knowingly signed over the property with full capacity and understanding. This case is not about legal validity, but buyer's remorse. Judge Downey looked over her glasses. Let me understand. You're claiming an elderly woman accidentally gave away her home out of regret, not manipulation. The lawyer nodded. She trusted her son. Trust is not illegal. The judge turned to me then. Mrs. Carter, she said, voice level, did your son explain the nature of the document before you signed it? I met her eyes, voice steady. He said it was to help secure a loan, that it wouldn't change anything, that it was temporary. Silence. Then Denise spoke again. Your Honor, I'd like to submit an additional item for the court's review. She held up a smaller envelope, aged at the corners. It's a personal letter from Mr. John Carter to his wife, my client, written the week the clause was filed. In it, he explicitly states his intent to protect Evelyn's lifelong right to the home, emphasizing this clause was created for that very purpose. It speaks directly to intent and clarification. She walked it over, handed it to the clerk. The judge read silently for a few beats. When she looked back up, something had shifted. The survivorship clause was not revoked. The intent was clear. The timing of the sale and lack of disclosure raised serious questions. Rachel crossed her arms. Marcus's foot stopped bouncing. Motion to freeze all proceedings related to the property is granted, the judge said. We will be investigating potential fraudulent misrepresentatio. N court date to be set to determine whether the defendant misled the plaintiff into relinquishing title. It was over for now, but the momentum had changed. Marcus finally glanced at me as we stood to leave. His mouth opened, closed. I stared back, not angry, just done. As we walked toward the elevator, Denise smiled faintly. Judge liked the letter. She should. John always did have good timing. We stepped into the hallway. It was brighter there, too bright for Rachel's glasses. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. Let them sit in their own silence a while. Mine was light now. Word spreads faster than you'd think, especially in neighborhoods where porches are closer than driveways, and everyone's known what cabinet you keep sugar in since '94. By the end of the week, even dolers from 2 blocks over had heard about the court thing, which was her polite way of asking me, at the local diner, if it was true that my own son tried to sell the house out from under me. I didn't confirm, I didn't deny, I just stirred my coffee and said, "Some things that are yours still need you to fight for them." She nodded like she understood, and then brought me a slice of pie on the house. I told myself I didn't care what the neighbors thought, but I did, not because I needed sympathy, but because small towns remember betrayal. They archive it between pancake breakfasts and city council meetings. A week after the injunction, I saw Rachel. She was dragging 2 suitcases into the back of an Uber, mascara streaked under those perfect eyes. I stood in the living room with the curtain just slightly parted, half ashamed to be watching, half sure I had the right. She didn't slam the door, didn't scream, just got in the car and left. Marcus wasn't with her. That night, my voicemail blinked once. I let it sit for an hour before hitting play. Rachel's voice, hollow. "Evelyn, I don't know what to say. I didn't know the clause mattered. I didn't know what he was really doing. I should have asked more questions. I'm sorry. We're taking space. I've gone to stay with my sister." Click. No apology for encouraging the betrayal. But maybe, remorse in her own way, I didn't call back. Some silences don't need to be broken. I walked around the house that evening like I always did, passing the spots where memories lived louder than furniture. John's old recliner, now empty. The corner of the kitchen where Marcus once spilled orange juice and sobbed because he thought he'd ruined the floor. Everything looked the same, but everything felt different. The walls seemed to breathe quieter. The air was honest. The next day, the mailman paused in front of my porch, handed me a stack of envelopes. I nodded politely, ready to turn in. Then he added, "You're stronger than I'd be, Mrs. Carter. My mom," she would have folded. I blinked. He blushed under his ball cap. "It's just good to see someone stand up, that's all." I nodded again, this time slower, thanked him. Inside the stack, amid the catalogs and bills, was a pale blue envelope with handwriting I recognized but hadn't seen in decades. Lisa, my niece John's side, hadn't written in nearly 10 years. Inside the envelope, a handwritten card. "Aunt Evelyn, I just heard what happened. I can't believe Marcus would do that. Uncle John would be proud of you for standing tall if you ever come to Vermont. My guest room's always yours. Love, Lisa." It was folded neatly. No Instagram, no voicemail, no empty emoji, just ink, paper, and a small bridge that hadn't yet burned. I placed it on the mantel, beside John's photo. That night, I lit a candle in the living room, not for prayer, not for ritual, just to watch something glow without burning me. And as the flame flickered, I thought about Marcus. About how, somewhere in a city office or a too-expensive condo he probably couldn't afford without stealing something first, he was sitting in the silence he made. Sometimes, the worst part of consequences isn't the penalty. It's the echo. It's knowing the person you took for granted stopped waiting for you to come home. Outside, the wind shifted. Leaves whispered across the porch like old secrets finally exhaled. I stepped out in my robe and slippers into the dusk, watched them swirl and scatter. No broom needed tonight. Let them blow free. Let them make room. I walked the house slowly that morning. No fanfare, no victory lap, just me, my slippers. Quiet steps on hardwood John once laid with his own hands, one crooked board still insisting on its little squeak no matter how many times he kicked at it. I never fixed it. Still won't. Some imperfections are part of the contract. The ruling came at 9:14 a.m. sharp. Denise had called, her voice calm but carrying something just under the surface, a tight satisfaction, like the pop of a champagne cork held between the fingers. "It's official," she said. "Title reverts. Court recognized the clause, the misrepresentati. On the breach. They ruled in your favor on every count." I didn't say anything for a second. Then, softly, "And Marcus?" "Fined, license under review. Judge mentioned possible ethics violations if he doesn't disclose this on all future applications. Might not be prison, but it's expensive fallout." I nodded, even though she couldn't see it. "Thank you, Denise," I said, "for everything." "You saved yourself, Evie," she replied. "I just held the flashlight." I liked that. After we hung up, I stood in the hallway for a long stretch of minutes, staring at the front door. Something shifted in me. Not anger, not relief, permission. I went to the shed, found the drill, and unscrewed the front doorknob, the old brass one that stuck in winter. I replaced it with a new satin nickel lock I'd bought 2 years ago but never used. John hated the look, said it didn't match the trim, but he wasn't here to hate it now. And I needed it to turn clean. I needed it to say, "This is mine," in every smooth click. I repainted the mailbox. I pulled weeds. I cleared out the pantry shelf lined with expired jars I'd never open again. Everything small, but together. It felt like exhaling after a year-long breath. I took down the lace curtains in the living room that Rachel once sniffed at. She said they made the place look stuck in time. Exactly. I folded them carefully, placed them with the quilts, and hung simple linen panels instead. Then I went to the mantel. John's photo was always off to the side, polite, unassuming. He hated being the center of anything, but I centered him anyway, because this house stood because he stood. And when Marcus tried to take it, it was John's foresight that held the line. I wiped the glass, lit a small candle, sipped my tea in the silence. Later that evening, Denise came by unannounced. She always did that when something sat heavy. She brought chamomile, and honey, no need to ask. We sat on the porch, the air crisp, wind threading through the bare branches lining the yard. "Feels different," she said. "The house, like it's breathing again." "It is," I said, "but quieter, maybe." She looked at me for a moment. Then, "Will you talk to him, Marcus?" I didn't answer right away. "You don't have to," she added softly, "but you could." I sipped my tea, let the heat settle in me. After a while, I said, "He'll reach out eventually, not because he's sorry, because something will go wrong again. And he'll remember I used to solve things, that I used to say yes." "Will you?" I looked out across the yard, at the fence still leaning, the rose bush still tangled. "I don't know," I murmured, "but I know I won't forget." She nodded. We didn't say much else after that. She left around 7. The house was mine again, not just in paper, in rhythm, in breath. And when I locked the new door behind me and turned that clean nickel knob with a satisfying snick, I knew. I hadn't just reclaimed a house. I'd reclaimed myself. "Will you ever speak to him again?" Denise's question had been hanging in the air since she left. And now, hours later, it clung to the corners of my living room like cigarette smoke from a party long over. I stood at the window, cup of lukewarm tea in hand, watching dusk settle on the street like a wool blanket pulled over everything. "I don't know," I whispered to no one. Because the truth was, I still saw Marcus everywhere. In the hallway where he practiced his prom speech. In the doorframe where I marked his height in faded pencil lines. In the corner of the garage where his old tools lay rusted and untouched. The child I raised, curious, messy, bright, he lived like a ghost in the bones of this place. But the man, the one who called me a short-term inconvenience in a leaked email during the sale process, who told the closing agent I'd be out of the way before final inspection. That man wasn't a stranger. He was worse. He was a son who had memorized my weaknesses, then repackaged them as opportunity. They say motherhood is unconditional, and maybe it is. Maybe love doesn't vanish, but it can go quiet, it can let go, and I think that's where I was now, not angry, not broken, but released. I walked to the old dining table, ran my hand along its edge. This house had protected me, not because of walls or locks or paperwork, but because it reminded me of who I was when I was steady, when I was still my own, and I wasn't going to waste that gift. So I made a call. 2 weeks later, on a rainy Thursday, 6 folding chairs circled my dining room. The women who sat in them were just like me, gray-haired, sharp-eyed, and too used to being spoken over in family meetings and real estate offices. They came with file folders, letters, questions, regrets, and we talked about power of attorney, about hidden clauses, about adult children who smiled while edging them out of their own lives. I didn't have all the answers, but I had my story, and I told it, not bitter. Not exaggerated, just true. And when I saw one woman across the table, Connie, a retired nurse with arthritis, lean back and say, "I thought I was the only one," I knew. Something good grew from this mess. Maybe it wasn't the kind of legacy I'd hoped for, but it was something, and it was mine. Later that night, I returned to the porch. The swing creaked as I sat, familiar music. John's Creek, his favorite spot. The wind carried the smell of wet leaves. Quiet stretched long and easy. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel victorious, but I felt intact, and that was more than enough. They don't warn you, you know, that sometimes the people you love most will be the ones who cost you the most. Not in money, in peace, in memory, in the delicate trust that says, "You're safe here." I thought I was safe in my family, safe in the home I built, safe in the love I gave so freely. But what I learned, painfully, slowly, is that safety doesn't come from love alone. It comes from boundaries sharpened by wisdom, from saying no when your heart screams yes, from remembering that motherhood isn't martyrdom and giving everything doesn't make someone worthy of it. I lost something when I signed that paper, not just a house. I lost the illusion that love protects you from betrayal, but I gained something too. Resolve, clarity, and eventually ownership, not just of the house, but of my part in handing it away and my power in taking it back. If you're listening to this and you feel that chill in your chest, the one that comes when someone you raised, loved, protected, starts treating you like a stepping stone, I want you to remember this. You are not alone. And you are not too old to fight. You are not naive for loving. You're not foolish for trusting. But you can be wise from this moment forward. Let your voice be louder than guilt. Let your story stand taller than their lies. And don't ever confuse silence with weakness, because I was silent once, and now I speak. If this story reminded you of something you've been through, or something you're still walking through, leave me a comment. Tell your story, or just say, "I hear you." Hit like if you believe women deserve to own their strength and their homes. Subscribe to hear more stories like this one of loss, of clarity, of taking your life back. Share it with someone who needs to know they're not crazy, they're just waking up. And if no one's told you lately, you're not a burden, you're not broken, you're still here. And that counts for everything.